Mainstream media like movies, television, video games, and music have all shaped us in some way, whether we care to admit it or not. Did you end up getting the Rachel haircut in the mid-90s because of Friends? Or maybe you began wearing headbands because of Gossip Girl's Blair Waldorf. Regardless of our own personalities and styles, it's impossible to say that none of us have been influenced by the things we've seen on the big or small screen. But have you ever seen a gruesome death in a movie and thought to yourself, I could do that? Hopefully not, but serial killer Nathaniel White did after seeing the sequel to the ever-popular 1987 movie Robocop. This is a brief history of Nathaniel White. As always, this episode of A Brief History contains graphic content and may not be suitable for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. As another small disclaimer, finding information regarding Nathaniel White was difficult at best. I've done my best to compile and corroborate the information I found, but of course I'm only human. If you do find any misinformation within this video, please feel free to correct me below in the comments. Nathaniel White was born in New York on July 28, 1960. Not much is known about White's childhood, but in court documents for a 1987 arrest, White stated that his parents had moved the family to Poughkeepsie, New York in the early 1970s, when White was just about 10 years old. Both of White's parents were diligent factory workers who tried to provide their son with the best life possible. White also claimed that he had a wonderful relationship with his parents, and that his upbringing was relatively normal and should have raised no red flags to the man's eventual evil deeds. Though, friends and acquaintances would later say that White was known to brag about his sexual exploits, despite folks knowing that White was regularly turned down by women. A woman who grew up on the same block in Poughkeepsie eventually stated that White was, quote, rejected from ladies all of the time. White went through schooling with no issue and graduated from Poughkeepsie High School in 1979. After graduating from high school, White took a gap year and worked around Poughkeepsie before joining the United States Army in 1980. White was discharged from the Army just 3 years later in 1983 and moved to Maryland for a brief period before returning to the Hudson Valley region of New York. White began running into trouble with the law in 1986, when he was arrested in connection to the robberies of 3 convenience stores. Not only would this be White's first conviction, but it was the first time he had ever been arrested. It was stated by a witness that in at least one of the robberies, White had been carrying a gun, though the authorities never found a gun in White's possession, leading to the charges being for robbery, rather than armed robbery, which would have carried a much more significant sentence. And despite the fact that White had robbed 3 convenience stores, he was given a plea deal and was able to plead guilty to just a single count of robbery. White was sentenced for 3 to 9 years and was released on parole after 3 years in 1989. Due to his problems with alcohol and marijuana, a condition of White's parole was that he refrain from using during his time on parole. White wouldn't stay out of trouble for long and was arrested for the second time in April of 1991. White had been charged with abducting 16-year-old Caprice Lynn Rocher, involving brandishing a razor blade at the young girl. White pled guilty to a simple misdemeanor for the abduction and was eligible for parole after just a year. But the abduction was not the only crime White had committed in 1991. It was simply the first one he had been caught for. Just a month prior to his arrest in April of 91, White killed his first victim. Juliana R. Frank of Middletown, New York, would be Nathaniel White's first victim. She was pregnant with her 3rd child at the time. White later stated that he found what he called inspiration for his first killing from an unlikely source, Robocop 2, starring Peter Weller. White would state, "The first girl I killed was from a Robocop movie. I seen him cut somebody's throat, then take the knife and slit down the chest to the stomach, and left the body in a certain position. With the first person I killed, I did exactly what I saw in the movie." Frank's naked body was dumped on a set of abandoned railroad tracks, but the authorities had no leads on the death of Juliana Frank and would not connect her death to White for some time. While the authorities searched for anyone in connection to the murder of Juliana Frank, Nathaniel White went to prison for the second time, but only for a year due to his plea deal. In April of 1992, White was released on parole and visited his parole officer regularly, testing negative for drugs whenever asked. White's second victim would be his youngest of all. Christine Klebb was not only just 14 years old, but was also the niece of White's girlfriend, Jill Garrison. Klebb disappeared on June 1st, just 2 months after White's second release from prison. An entire month went by before Klebb was reported missing by her family, and her body wouldn't be found until August 4th, off Echo Lake Road in Goshen, New York. White's third victim was Lorette Huggins Riviere, who was killed in early July of 1992. Riviere was a close friend of Jill Garrison, White's girlfriend at the time, and Riviere's children had even stayed over at White's home just weeks before her murder. And yet, White still wasn't a suspect for the unsolved murders in the Hudson Valley area of New York. Murders number 4 and 5 happened simultaneously. Cousins Angelina Hopkins and Brenda L. Whiteside were spending a girls' evening at a Poughkeepsie tavern called the Blue Note Tavern when they were approached by White at the bar on July 20th, 1992. The two women were last seen leaving the Blue Note Tavern with Nathaniel White in his pickup truck. Both women were then found dumped in an abandoned farmhouse in Goshen in early August 1992. They had both been severely beaten, with the cause of death being blunt force trauma to the face and head for both women. Just over a week later, White killed his sixth victim, Adrienne M. Hunter, by stabbing her to death. White dumped the body of Hunter in the Hillcrest Manor restaurant, which had previously been nearly entirely burned down and was therefore abandoned. It would eventually take the family of two of the victims, Hopkins and Whiteside, to crack the case of the Robocop killer. Hopkins' sister, Cecilia Hopkins, had also been present at the Blue Note Tavern the night of her sister's disappearance, and she had remembered seeing her sister and cousin leaving the tavern with a man the night of their disappearances. Despite reporting the disappearances to the Poughkeepsie police, the police did not investigate the missing persons report, and Detective T.R. Alston of the Poughkeepsie Police told the women to find out who Hopkins and Whiteside had left with before they could become involved. Cecilia was desperate to either find her sister or find out what had happened to her sister, and Cecilia and her mother continued their own investigation on the disappearance of their family members. The State Police of New York got involved once the body of Adrienne Hunter was found. The State Police quickly came to suspect that the murder of Hunter was related to the rampant disappearances and murders happening in the Hudson Valley during July of 1992. In early August, White made a mistake and returned to the Blue Note Tavern, where he had picked up his fourth and fifth victims, Hopkins and Whiteside. While at the tavern, White was identified by Cecilia Hopkins after receiving a call from a friend who was at the bar, and after a bit of back and forth and claiming that he, quote, didn't speak to cops, White began talking to Cecilia Hopkins, who he told that he had dropped the two women off at a train station at the end of the evening. The police at the scene quietly ran White's license number and found his criminal record fairly easily, and they knew they had a suspect. White was arrested and taken into custody. Nathaniel White confessed to the crimes and took the police to the abandoned farmhouse he used as his dumping ground. On August 7, 1992, Nathaniel White was indicted by a grand jury for the murder of the young Christine Klebb. Just a month later, all 5 of the other murders were added to White's indictment. Before the trial, White's lawyer, Bernard Brady, stated that White intended to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, a plea that is frequently not accepted. Nathaniel White was charged with 6 counts of second-degree murder, and did eventually plead not guilty by reason of insanity. Despite the plea, White was convicted on all 6 counts of second-degree murder and was convicted on April 14, 1993, just 2 years after his first murder. Judge Jeffrey Berry sentenced Nathaniel White to 150 years to life. White is still serving his sentence to this day at the Elmira Correctional Facility, and White's case was used as a defense of reinstating the death penalty in New York by then-Governor George Pataki. White's crimes have been featured in some mini-documentaries, including investigative reports and an episode of Evil Lives Here, which heavily featured Nathaniel's then-girlfriend Jill Garrison. There are many groups, parents, and people out there that claim movies, video games, and other forms of media can cause violence, and nearly all of it is unfounded. Except for Nathaniel White. Did Robocop 2 actually push White to commit these heinous crimes? Or was he simply looking for any excuse for his actions? Thank you for watching this episode of A Brief History. Thank you to my patrons who support this series and get behind the scenes and early access content. You are very much appreciated. If you do enjoy this series, be sure to like and subscribe for more true crime Sims videos every Friday. Thanks for watching, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.